day 848 of the Trump administration, and the president's latest assertion that the Russia investigation was actually all about illegal surveillance on his presidential campaign, which he prefers to call the more nefarious title of spying. That belief is getting new support from his handpicked Attorney General William Barr. This was Trump's message early today, and we quote, "My campaign for president was conclusively spied on. Nothing like this has ever happened in American politics. A really bad situation. Treason means long jail sentences, and this was treason." So, usual Friday stuff there, but about the same time, the Wall Street Journal posted an interview with Attorney General Barr. The AG told the Journal, quote, "Government power was used to spy on American citizens." Barr also talked about his newly launched inquiry into the origins of the Russia investigation with Fox News, saying it's necessary because Special Counsel Mueller's work did not cover the possibility that officials may have abused their power.
He was looking at whether or not the Trump campaign had conspired with the Russians, but he was not going back and looking at the counterintelligence program.
Can you tell us what the Steele dossier had to do with this?
It's a very unusual situation to have opposition research like that, especially one that on its face had a number of clear mistakes. To use that to conduct counterintelligence against an American political campaign is would be a strange development.
Republicans have said for months that these men, Brennan, Clapper, maybe James Comey, had it in for Trump. Do you think that's true?
Again, I'm not going to speculate about their motives.
The president calls this a witch hunt. He calls it a hoax.
If you were the president, I think he would view it as a witch hunt and a hoax.
Note that there have been no public reports of surveillance of a, quote, political campaign. The FBI has also said it did not rely solely on the Steele dossier to launch this inquiry. Late today, a former FBI official who helped oversee parts of the Russia investigation defended the Bureau's actions.
We were concerned about what was going on here, and those events didn't just happen in a vacuum. We were looking at what Russia was up to generally and the threat that they pose. We were looking at what they were trying to do with our election.
We also saw Trump revisit history today concerning his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Flynn is still awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to lying to investigators about conversations with Russia's ambassador. As we reported last night, newly unsealed court papers note people tied to Congress and to the White House tried to influence Flynn's cooperation deal with Mueller. Well, just today, Trump posted the following on Twitter, and full disclosure, this one seems designed to take up our time and waste our breath because it was so immediately and provably wrong. He wrote the following. It now seems the General Flynn was under investigation long before was common knowledge. It would have been impossible for me to know this, but if that was the case, and with me being one of two people who would become president, why was I not told so that I could make a change? The simple answer here, among the people who warned Donald Trump about Mike Flynn, former New Jersey governor, then transition chief Chris Christie, and for good measure, the president of the United States at the time, Barack Obama. Also, for good measure, Sally Yates, then number 2 at the Justice Department, don't forget, went over to the White House to warn them about Flynn being in their midst, something she later testified to Congress about.
We felt like it was critical that we get this information to the White House in part because the vice president was unknowingly making false statements to the public, and because we believed that General Flynn was compromised with respect to the Russians.
Flynn was forced out after exactly 24 days on the job. There is also a new front in this fight with the House Democrats over 6 years of the president's tax returns. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is refusing to comply with a subpoena for those returns from the House Ways and Means Committee. In a letter to the chairman, Richard Neal, the Treasury Secretary based his refusal on this, quote, "The committee's request lacks a legitimate legislative purpose." Chairman Neal responded in a statement, quote, "The law does not allow for discretion as to whether to comply with a request for tax returns." Neal said the committee will now likely go to court to get Trump's tax returns. That sets up our leadoff discussion on another busy Friday night. Michael Schmidt's with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington correspondent for The New York Times. Annie Carney's back with us, White House reporter with The New York Times. And Harry Litman returns to our broadcast, DOJ veteran who is a former U.S. attorney and former deputy assistant attorney general under President Clinton. These days, he happens to be the creator and executive producer of the new podcast called Talking Feds. Michael, I'd like to begin with you. With the president talking spying, with the president having found a perfectly pliant, it seems, attorney general on this front, what have you heard about the seriousness of purpose behind this investigation of the investigators?
Well, that's what we sort of don't know. We reported this week that Barr has asked the U.S. attorney in Connecticut, Durham, to look at this. But the U.S. attorney is not using his criminal powers to do it. He would simply be reviewing the issue of the counterintelligence investigation and how it all began. At the sort of heart of this issue is the fact that the president has finally found someone to be his attorney general that will do the things that he wants. Sessions wouldn't do that. Rosenstein wouldn't do that. But here you have Barr echoing the president's talking points and doing it in an effective way. Barr has figured out a way to stay on message on these issues and to keep it alive, and allows the president to undermine the roots of this investigation. And here we are, over 2.5 years, almost 3 years since it began, and now we're going to go back and litigate the rudimentary parts that started it.
Harry Litman, say what you will about James Comey, and a ton of people already have, but here is the former head of the FBI tonight on social media. The AG should stop sliming his own department. If there are bad facts, show us or search for them professionally, and then tell us what you found. An AG must act like the leader of the Department of Justice, an organization based on truth. Donald Trump has enough spokespeople. Harry, how are you feeling about your old workplace and its current leadership these days?
Pretty grim. Comey's message, I think, is unassailable. What he's really saying is Barr is talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the surface, he's just saying, well, we need to figure it out, and I haven't been fully satisfied. But there's just no doubt that he's carefully chosen words and rhetoric that echo the talking points of Team Trump and the president himself, and is essentially employing dog whistle terminology to keep this whole notion alive, even as he suggests, well, I haven't decided anything yet. Comey's point is well taken. If you have proof of this, fine, come forward. But until you do, the sort of insinuations, especially as they continue to sort of trash really good, professionally respected members of the FBI, are just deplorable.
And Harry, let's speak English here. A lot of institutionalists and folks who are veterans of the Justice Department are still slack-jawed that this guy was willing to come out and say out loud, no collusion, prior to us ever having seen a word of the Mueller report, and he said it 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, so that's the whole that's where the whole kind of Barr bandwagon, on which I was a member, went totally off the tracks, and that's where everything has been seen through since. When he came out there and basically took a report that was very damning on collusion and conclusively damning on obstruction, and called it no big deal. Everyone move along here, folks. Nothing here. It became clear that, to speak in plain terms, he was in the tank for the president. And that's continued to be the case since, but in a somewhat kind of clever way that doesn't go all the way on the rhetoric of the president himself, but still gives kind of aid and comfort to the talking points.
Annie Carney, that's why I think it's fine to call him a pliant attorney general unless and until proven otherwise. I have a bit to play for you. This is William Barr talking about his boss, the president.
I didn't know him before. I had only met with him really a substantive discussion with him at the time he decided to appoint me Attorney General. But I think we have a good, candid relationship.
Andy, let's take the other side of this equation. Are Trump insiders happy they finally got their man at the Justice Department?
Well, they often echo what the president feels, and the president is absolutely thrilled. He feels like he finally has the attorney general he's always wanted in there. And what Barr said in that clip is true. They didn't know each other. He wasn't Trump's first pick for the job. He was recommended to him blindly. The weekend before his letter came out, we reported that the president was asking around nervously, like, what do people think of Bill Barr? He did not really know what to expect. But in addition to the backup he's giving him on the Mueller report, he is also supporting his political agenda in other ways. We saw him standing in the Oval Office next to the president and giving him the legal groundwork to overrule Congress's attempt to block him from his emergency declaration, and even saying that it was actually necessary for the American people, for the safety of the American people. We see him in El Salvador this week talking about MS-13 and illegal immigration. So it's not only on Mueller that he's towing the line. He is backing up the president in all of his political agenda other than Mueller as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.